All right, good afternoon. I thank everyone for joining us. Got some brief comments to make, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. I started out this week by directing the Division of Energy, in which we have moved to the Department of Economic Development to develop a comprehensive energy plan for our state. We know that clean, affordable, abundant energy is vital to the environment, our economy, and our national security, and with this much at stake, we need to take a strategic approach. Leading this effort will be the new director of that division, Lewis Mills, and its new deputy director of policy, Christy Manning. Lewis's team will solicit input from a broad array of stakeholders and develop a blueprint that will guide energy policy in Missouri for years to come. As we get later in the summer, or the fall, earlier in the fall, whenever, I will be involved, obviously, in this process. We want to formalize this robust and transparent process in the coming weeks and chart a course toward a sustainable, prosperous energy future for our state. This week we also lost a friend, a colleague, and a courageous warrior for the working men and women of our state. Rory Ellinger dedicated his life to breaking down the barriers of injustice and helping every Missouri live up to their highest potential. Just 1 week ago today, I was grateful for the opportunity to join representatives and senators from both sides of the aisle who gathered to honor Rory by signing his law to improve the health of nursing moms and infants into law. He has left a legacy of greater opportunity and justice for all Missourians, and we are all better for his devotion to his high calling. Our thoughts and prayers are with Linda, Maggie, Martin, and all of Rory's family and friends as they mourn his loss. Today, I have also ordered the flags lowered for Sergeant Timothy Wayne Owens, formerly of Bravo, who was killed last week in a tragic shooting at Fort Hood, Texas. Accounts of the tragic events at Fort Hood that day indicate that Sergeant Owens lost his life trying to stop this horrific act of violence, and I ask that all Missourians remember his sacrifice when they see the lowered flags across our state. Now, the two specific issues I'd like to address today concern the fiscal year 2014 supplemental budget passed by the General Assembly this week, the fiscal 2015 budget being considered by the Senate Appropriations Committee, and the priorities that these budgets reflect. Today, with our economy picking up steam and our perfect AAA credit rating intact, we have an opportunity to invest in our most precious asset, the one thing we know will help us build this momentum in the future, our kids. So, first, the supplemental budget for fiscal year 2014. In January, when it became clear that gaming and lottery revenues dedicated to education were coming in below expectations, my supplemental budget request included $44.1 million in general revenue to make up for the shortfall. This decline in lottery and gaming revenues reflect a trend we're seeing nationwide, but it also left our schools and higher education institutions with $44.1 million less than they had been appropriated for the current fiscal year. When the House Budget Committee failed to include these resources in their supplemental budget, I sent a letter on February 10th to each member of the House of Representatives, calling on them to, quote, immediately restore this essential funding. On March 4th, the House of Representatives approved only half of my $44 million request in an amendment on the House floor. This was still $22 million short. So when the supplemental budget got to the Senate, my budget director, Linda Luber, followed up on March 10th with a letter to the Senate Appropriations Committee reiterating that the full $44.1 million was necessary to provide schools with the funding that was appropriated to them in the current fiscal year. My staff has distributed copies of the letters to you, which provide a record of our communication to members about this issue. The need was clear, the general revenue was and continues to be available, and there was absolutely no reason why our students shouldn't have gotten the resources they were promised. Unfortunately, despite our clear and repeated warnings about the consequences, the General Assembly has once again failed to make funding for education a priority. The supplemental budget passed by the General Assembly on Tuesday included only half of the funding needed to close this gap. This means, as a result of the legislature's actions, public education, both K-12 and higher education, will be forced to take an avoidable and entirely unnecessary $22 million cut for the current fiscal year, as the fiscal year ends will end on June 30th. Therefore, I intend to allocate this underfunding in the following manner. $3.2 million will come from community colleges, $3.2 million will come from our four-year institutions, and $15.6 million will be cut from the K-12 Foundation formula. These are real cuts that will affect all Missouri students, even though there is sufficient general revenue available right now to cover the shortfall and make our schools and higher education institutions whole. We will continue to monitor the revenues coming in from the lottery and riverboat gaming through the fourth quarter of this year and determine whether further action is needed if this trend continues. And while it is too late to fix this problem for the current fiscal year, I call on legislators to right this wrong by including that additional funding in the fiscal year 2015 budget to make up for this loss. That budget is under consideration as we speak. Now, when we're talking about our priorities, keeping vulnerable children safe from abuse and neglect should be right at the top. As a House interim committee that examined this issue documented in detail last year, our frontline children's service workers have some of the toughest and most important jobs in state government. Each day in communities across our state, these dedicated men and women go into very difficult and dangerous situations to keep children safe and hold those who harm them accountable. That's why over the past year, my administration worked with child advocates and others to develop a plan to make sure these workers have the resources and tools they need. My budget for fiscal year 2015 included more than $4.6 million to put more technology in the hands of children's division workers so they can maintain and update data from the field, to establish a loan forgiveness program to help recruit and retain qualified staff, and to widen the rungs on the career ladder so that workers who stay with the organization can increase their responsibilities and compensation. I appreciate the members of the House for recognizing the importance of this issue and including this critical funding in their version of the budget. Unfortunately, the Senate Appropriations Committee, just hours after adding $33 million for a new state historical society building, decided to zero out these resources with no explanation during markup earlier this week. It's often said that budgets are about priorities, and a budget that cuts funding to keep abused children safe, but adds funding for a brand new government building, does not reflect our priorities or our values as Missourians. Here in Missouri, we believe in fiscal discipline, we believe in keeping our promises, we believe in protecting kids, and we believe in public schools. These are the values I urge the members of the General Assembly to keep in mind as they finalize the budget in the coming weeks. Thank you, and with that, I'd like to take any questions.
Governor, several of the budget decisions that were being made in the Senate Appropriations Committee, they were choosing the lowest number that was on the line, whether it was your recommendation or the House recommendation, based on the idea if they spend more than what you want, you're not going to allow it to go out the door. Is that an accurate depiction of your attitude when budget lines are increased?
My attitude is we balance budgets, and in those balanced budgets we lay out priorities. I laid out higher education and K-12 education and preschool, and working forward in some of these other areas as a key priority this year. I laid out a budget in January that I felt did that. I still feel that the budget I laid out in January lays forward the correct path forward for the state.
And the Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman mentioned many times that he was creating positions for negotiation. Are there budget lines that should be off limits for, creating a negotiating position?
Tell that to the folks last year that heard that same voice when they were talking about cutting first steps. Tell it to those families. Tell it to the educators today who do not have $22 million worth of money that was in the budget for them to create. No, but this isn't some political game. This is reality. We've got 6 weeks to go into session. This is about what the priorities of the state are. This is not some sort of, I laid out my priorities. I'm going to continue to push for them. I think they're important. I'm not trying to set up any negotiating position. I'm trying to continue to move the state forward. And I think everybody that takes that as their guiding principle will help the state move forward.
Governor of the House and Senate.
Just the difference began to emerge on the education budget. You should pick up the phone, talk to Schaefer, talk to Sturdy, the two budget chairs.
Which one of the differences that I laid out here? I mean, the $22 million that is not going to happen in schools, you bet we did. I talked to him not only personally, but I talked to him by letter. We put it in writing. The budget director has. We've laid this point out in public a number of places. It's disconcerting when priorities that we lay out, both in orally as well as in writing, are not followed up on when it comes to a budget that's already been passed with money that's available to do it.
But why not sit down with the two of them in this office and work out an agreement?
I mean, we talk to members all the time. We will work out we're talking about relatively small amounts of money in a very large budget here. And it shouldn't be lost in context that on many of the things that we're finding solid agreement forward. But I thought these two matters, one in which I felt was so important that I put in writing to every member of the House, that Linda Luberin put in writing to every member of the Senate committee, that was still not followed, which means that now today we have to not allocate, we have to call universities and high schools and grade schools and tell them the money that the legislature appropriated last year is not coming. That was completely avoidable. I don't know how much clearer I can be other than orally and in writing to both houses as well as in public a number of occasions. It just seems to me that in certain situations that their priorities are a little different.
Explain, if they appropriated it last year, how is it that money is not, what happened that it's
People
not?
aren't buying as many scratchers tickets, and people aren't gambling as much. That's a trend we've seen. I said at the very beginning in the letter I originally sent, that the number that folks thought about was not going to be there. I mean, once again, I think that they're perilously close to doing it again in this budget. Although last year, obviously, we were all working on those numbers, trying to come up with the best estimates we could. As we saw the year move forward, it became clearly apparent to us that for a lot of reasons, gaming revenue wasn't coming in at the same level. And since that is directly earmarked in specific ways for education, it was really important to lay that out, since there had already been a budget passed that had specific amounts of money in it. And when those monies don't come in, as they have not, then you have to that's what supplemental budgets are about. That's why you have a supplemental budget, to make up for that with general revenue. That's why we so clearly lay this out, and why I'm somewhat pick an adjective.
You sent the letters, did either Mr. Stream or Mr. Schaefer or somebody else on those committees call you back and say, we're not gonna do it because X?
We sent the letter, and some people, then we had a little chat, which some of you typed and printed in various publications around the state from various folks. And then on the House floor, after that chatter, they put half of it back in, after saying, whatever they said in that chat. The bottom line, I've laid this out as clearly as I possibly can. I'm disappointed that they didn't, that with the action of the supplemental budget, they failed to live up to the promises made to education in the budget we have right here.
Governor, why not veto the bill and make them start over with a new supplemental budget that would include the money?
We got 6 weeks to go. We got a real budget to get done. Supplemental budgets are designed to fill holes. We laid out clearly what the case was. How much clearer can it be, guys? Come on. I said it in public. I wrote written letters to everybody. You all wrote about this stuff. They were well aware of this decision, and I thought if this is their decision to not make education a priority in this budget year, to force us not to be able to live up to the commitment of the budget that was passed last year, then so be it. Let's move on. Let's get going forward. I'm certainly not going to spend the entirety of the rest of the next 6 weeks focused on this relatively narrow difference.
Governor, Senator Schaefer is saying that the $4.6 million for the Children's Division he didn't think received enough vetting and was introduced relatively late. What would your message to him be?
Follow the House position and have a little discussion in your committee on stuff that's important. This is important stuff. The House had interim committees about it. We all have. Everybody here is well aware of the challenges that are faced with the difficult situations that occur in the child division, and are aware that we worked hard with a number of policymakers as well as folks in the legislature to come up with a solid set of recommendations. I think that one of the reasons I'm mentioning this one now is I think this clearly is a solvable problem, and I would hope that the Senate would take the House position. We'd be able to back these workers up, get them the technology they need, and continue to do what we can to make the state safer.
Comment on the two different versions of the criminal code coming through the legislative process. They're a lot different. Both the House and the Senate sponsors of each of those bills seem confident that they've got the better version.
The legislative process. There are many good people who spent a lot of time on this effort, both outside the building for a period of time as well as inside the building, and I appreciate that. But I also said, and I will continue to say, when you're doing something like this, rewriting the criminal code of the state, when you make changes in the criminal code, especially these substantive ones, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, there is simply no room for error. And unfortunately, there are too many times in the past where we've seen errors have been made. So I've just been trying to say to folks, as you go through the differences, the legitimate policy differences on some of these issues, let's not forget the writing and craftsmanship that goes along with them. Because this is an area of the law where it's extremely nuanced, it is incredibly specific. The burden of proof is the highest on the government because you're taking liberty from others, and it just needs to be done in a very precise fashion. Like I said before, there are many good people who spend a lot of time on this. I appreciate that, and we'll continue to communicate and talk with them. But it just this is one I'm just trying to make sure this is just no room for it. This is not a bill you can say there's a mistake and I'm going to sign it anyway. You know, we'll worry about cleaning that up later on. You don't. That's not the way that kind of bill goes.
Have you discussed your concerns with Stan Cox Real Justice?
I mean, they're well aware. Our staffs have had numerous and continue to have numerous directed conversations about all of these measures. Like I said, as I said before, there are good people who spend a lot of time. Let's get past the process and get to the substance, guys. This is real. This is not about who's saying hi to who or who's tweeting something about somebody or whether somebody's smiling at somebody in the hall. This is a real bill. It's a rewrite of the criminal code of the state of Missouri, and we're going to take it serious on serious. And I think there are good people working on it that are taking it seriously also. I just want everybody to know the bar is really high on this one because it's a big deal.
Are the backstops that they put in place, the backstops they put in place, the 2-year delay on the implementation, the Supreme Court committee that's supposed to review the bill, do any of those give you confidence in that you can work, that you can sign this bill and...
You don't do bill review for 2 years. You don't pass a bill and say, don't worry, 2 years later things may be bad, but I'm going to go ahead and make it a law today. And I'll hope that another legislature comes back and another governor reads it and fixes it. On the criminal code, that's not the way I operate. We're going to get this right. We're prepared and we are spending a tremendous amount of time at it, but some sort of thing, if we make a mistake when it comes to defining a crime or penalties, that's just, let's let after term limits, let the next group of legislators and the next governor clean that up. Not the way.
Given this bill has been in the works for 8 years, do you think something's been overlooked in all that time?
There are a lot of issues with this. This is a substantive, significant piece of legislation. That's why our staff's spending time with this. Why they're meeting with folks. That's why I'm not. My point is that as everybody working on this, I just want over the next 6 weeks, they're full effort, they're good intentions, and if there are things that folks have wording problems with, then you ought to move those out or back those out, and we ought to focus on the things that we know need to get done. The efficiencies and effectiveness we can pick up with a criminal code. Like I said before, I appreciate the good work that people have done and are doing, but in this situation. When we say, look, we got to make sure this is done well, and somebody says, don't worry about it, it won't really take effect for a couple of years. That's just not an answer to that question.
Both.
Priority goes actually the revision in the state was when the state repealed the crime of rape. The legislature did. The governor signed it. I can't remember if you were in the Senate at that time. But is that an issue that is in the back of your mind?
I was Attorney General at the time, and you also see some changes that have affected sentencing pretty dramatically, that affected current sentences that folks had. There was another measure passed while as Attorney General that could have affected thousands of sentences that caused a significant disruption in that area because of the shifts under habeas law. So I do say that spending 16 years as Attorney General has given me a unique and specific perspective. And a knowledge that there are ways to improve the criminal code. Okay, and I'm not here trying to. I'm just saying the bar's high. I'm not saying that the work is. I think there are good people, as I said, doing good work, and they need to keep working and make sure it's right. Yeah, Eli.
Is this something you want to have done this year? Do you want to sign this summer? What do you want to see in the criminal code since you have all the experience with it?
Like I said, I haven't gone through it line by line, and won't unless it gets to my desk. I think making sure we have an efficient. I just wouldn't want to speak to any specifics on it. As specific and as knowledgeable as the people who are working on this on, I would not show proper respect to the mindset.
Do you want to get this done this year?
if this is done, I want to get bills that are done right, done every year. I mean, I'm not, in areas like this where folks have spent a significant amount of time, but it's just gonna have to be done right.
Back to the supplemental budget for just a minute. There's $2 million for Normandy schools to finish out the year. It was started at 5, went to 1.5. Are you satisfied with what they've come up with for Normandy?
I mean, there's been a lot of give and take and back and forth. My sense is that for that discrete particular issue, which is the how to get them through the short period of time here, that's in the zone of adequacy. But it doesn't. There's a whole lot of steps on that whole issue area that the legislature's going to allow you to work on, and we're hopeful that we get a measure to my desk that clarifies some areas of the law that are important. So I think you got two steps. As far as the budget dollars, I think that my sense is that gets that lessens the short-term angst. But I should think that it should not lessen the focus on getting a better drafted solution to the overall challenge.
Would you like to see Norco stay as a school district or anything?
I want every school district to succeed. I mean, I want to do whatever we can to make sure that every kid in the state's getting an education, and I do think we need to engage with these schools earlier with their challenges. I think we need to help them. But there's a myriad of folks working on, good people working in this area. I think it's a little late in the session for me to our folks obviously been working with folks. I just would say to the legislature that putting this in the supplemental budget does not end the work that needs to get done in this issue right now. Now we might go next.
You mentioned the State Historical Society. The Senate has passed a bill that would allow the state to issue revenue bonds to fund maintenance needs throughout colleges and other state buildings. Is that in regards to your support of that, or should we issue bonds to sort of ease the backlog of maintenance needs throughout the state?
I mean, first and foremost, we need to build a new fold. I mean, in the hierarchy of needs of this state, I've laid out clearly, and I think a lot of other folks. So whatever else gets done, and so I've talked about bond issues for the last few years. I mean, there are certainly ways and unmet capital needs out there. I've also worked to lower the amount of debt we have, so we'd be in a situation both with a AAA credit rating and a lower debt level, that if we needed to make some of these strategic investments, that we could. So we look forward to working with the legislature in these areas to see if there are things, but I don't want this to get either so unwieldy or so challenging that we lose the clear focus and energy to get a rebuild of the state hospital, which we need to get going on. Yeah, Bob.
On the criminal code, you had said about a month ago you would prefer smaller pieces, that they break it up and do part, and part. Neither bill passed today does that. Are you okay, or can you accept this approach as long as the mistakes you're concerned about don't get made?
I like to sign good bills. It's, I will give it a thorough review, but,